Welcome to another season of the ACE-IT podcast, where we turn science into sense. In this season, we are introducing you, our listeners, to some of the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network, or JCOIN, family. In episodes 1 and 10, you will hear from our funder, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And in episodes 2 through 9, you will learn about cutting-edge and recent science published by some of the investigators working in the Learning to Advance Practice, or LEAP, program, a part of JCOIN. This is so exciting. So let's get started. I'm Danielle Rudes, your host, and this is ACE-IT. Today, we are going to explore a topic that has sparked intense debate and concern within the public and the law enforcement community: the risk of incidental fentanyl exposure. You've probably heard about this, how fentanyl absorbs into your skin almost immediately and causes severe effects, sometimes even cardiac arrest. This has caused an intense fear of fentanyl in the public and in the law enforcement field. Well, Brandon Del Pozo and colleagues sought to address this fear and the misinformation that causes it. In August of 2021, a dramatic video was released by San Diego County Sheriff Bill Gore. It allegedly depicted a deputy overdosing on fentanyl following incidental exposure during a field investigation. The video claims that the deputy's life was saved by the quick actions of his colleagues, who administered 4 doses of intranasal naloxone. However, this video quickly drew backlash from experts. Toxicologists continued that it is nearly impossible to inhale or absorb enough fentanyl through the skin to cause a quick overdose. They pointed out that the deputy's symptoms didn't align with those of an opioid overdose, and that the video's narration contained serious inaccuracies. To understand why this misinformation is so problematic, we must understand the science behind it. Studies, such as those by Moss and colleagues, conducted in 2018, have shown that incidental exposure to fentanyl cannot result in rapid, life-threatening overdoses. Despite this misinformation about the risks of incidental exposure persists among U.S. law enforcement. This myth was perpetuated by a 2016 advisory from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, which warned that touching or inhaling fentanyl could lead to rapid and severe health effects. This message, echoed by other authorities like the Department of Justice and the National Police Foundation, it contributed to a false narrative that minor incidental exposure to fentanyl could be fatal. The consequences of this misinformation are significant. It transforms overdose emergencies into perceived life and death situations for first responders, perpetuates the stigma that people who use illicit opioids are dangerous, and induces unnecessary stress among law enforcement officers. This can result in panic attacks and other distressing symptoms, which are often misinterpreted as evidence of fentanyl's effects. Experts suggest that these incidents are more likely due to anxiety rather than actual fentanyl exposure. Misdiagnoses can lead to inappropriate treatments and even more dangerous situations during genuine health emergencies. Correcting this misinformation is crucial. Both the American College of Medical Toxicology and the American Academy of Clinical Toxicology have released statements clarifying that toxicity from incidental exposure is nearly impossible. Law enforcement agencies in Canada and the UK have adjusted their warnings accordingly, but many departments in the US have not. Training first responders with accurate information about fentanyl is essential. It is important to recognize false overdose events as potentially indicative of other underlying health issues, promoting more accurate diagnoses and reducing unnecessary panic. The spread of misinformation about fentanyl is not limited to law enforcement videos. A study published by Leo Beletsky and colleagues in the International Journal of Drug Policy highlights how fentanyl panic has permeated mainstream and social media. Between 2015 in January and September 2019, 551 news articles about overdose risk from casual fentanyl contact appeared across 48 states. These articles received approximately 450,000 Facebook shares, potentially reaching nearly 70 million people. Alarmingly, misinformation about fentanyl received 15 times more social media visibility than corrective content. The most viral story involved an officer in East Liverpool, Ohio, who claimed to have overdosed by brushing white powder off his uniform. Despite the lack of laboratory confirmation, this story was shared widely and contributed to the fear surrounding fentanyl exposure. Beletsky and colleagues also point out that health-related information can delay overdose interventions and contribute to unnecessary stress and mental health issues among first responders. Efforts to combat this misinformation must be comprehensive, involving both mainstream and social media platforms to ensure accurate information reaches the public. Yet another study conducted by Rachel Winograd and colleagues in Missouri examined the impact of training programs designed to reduce emergency responders' perceived overdose risk from contact with fentanyl. Winograd and colleagues found that a brief 10-minute training session could significantly reduce the number of responders who believe they could overdose from touching fentanyl. Before the training, only 20.9% of participants correctly answered that it is false to say that one can overdose from touching fentanyl. After the training, this number jumped to 83.6%. This improvement was seen across both law enforcement officers and emergency medical services personnel, highlighting the effectiveness of these brief educational interventions. Winograd and colleagues' study underscores the importance of providing accurate information to emergency responders to ensure they are prepared to handle real overdose situations effectively without unnecessary fear or delay. In the wake of controversy, Sheriff Gore admitted that his video was based on his own diagnosis without consulting medical experts. He has since removed the video from social media, and the DEA has also removed its 2016 advisory. However, the misinformation continues to circulate online, perpetuating false beliefs. To combat this, a comprehensive effort to remove inaccurate content and educate law enforcement is needed. Evidence suggests that proper training can help correct these critical misconceptions. By addressing the psychological harms caused by false beliefs about fentanyl exposure, we can better protect the mental health of officers and improve emergency responses to actual overdoses. Thank you for listening to the ACEIT podcast. We love hearing from you. So if you have comments, topics to suggest, or some science you'd like us to cover in a future season, please write me, Danielle Rudes, at Sam Houston State University. My email is drudes@shsu.edu. And of course, thank you to the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network, JCOIN, their Coordination and Translation Center, funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, housed at George Mason University, where this podcast originated. Thank you to our fabulous scriptwriters on this season, Sam Houston State University doctoral students Alexa Mata and Bryce Kushmerik-McCune. And a huge and heartfelt thank you to Jason Luchin and the team at Slonky LLC for their amazing production. Tune in again soon for another episode of ACEIT.